A Trip into the Darkness, Chapter 35. They'd only been driving for an hour when Troy and his men ran into a roadblock. Military vehicles were blocking the road, and human soldiers were walking around with their guns out. Troy looked over at Mallory and found her fast asleep with her mouth slightly open. He hadn't fed from her. He had wanted to, but he didn't want her to think he was taking advantage of her again. After he'd gotten Mallory back, he had called his men to meet him. He had 6 cars full of his security traveling along Columbia's roads, heading back to the States. Troy's phone rang and he answered it. "It looks like they are searching everyone's cars," Marcus informed him. "That's just lovely," Troy said before hanging up. An officer came up to Troy's window and he rolled it down. "Can I help you?" Troy asked the bald man, who leaned in, looking in the back seat. Standing up, the guy turned away and pulled out his phone. Troy turned around and saw they had military vehicle trucks behind his car, trapping the men. "Fuck," Troy growled as he turned back around. After 10 minutes of waiting, he opened the door and got out. Multiple military officers pointed their guns at him. They were all human, so in theory he and his men could easily kill them all. Then the issue of getting out of the country fast enough before they sent more people after them would arise. Walking over to the guy who'd come up to his car, Troy was ready to ask what the holdup was and see if he could bribe the man. However, before he got to him, the sound of an engine zooming toward him filled the night. Troy turned and saw a red car pull up in between the military trucks. The door lifted open into the sky, and Andreas Gadino stepped out into the night wearing all black. Troy ground his teeth together as he walked back to the man. "Gadino, what do you want?" Troy asked, in the most professional voice that he could muster at the moment. Andreas's large hand slipped into his front pockets as he moved closer. "Troy Dinhart, I wouldn't have expected you to see you outside of your lair," Andres responded as both men stopped when they were a couple of feet away from each other. "I had personal business to attend to," Troy told him while looking into his eyes. A smile sped across Andreas's face before he said, "Personal business? Like kidnapping a woman that wants nothing to do with you?" "I would call it retrieving what's mine," Troy told him with a straight face. "But you see, Troy, she is not yours, and I know this fact because she is mine." A frown pulled at Troy's face as he contemplated what Andreas had said. The man's scent was sweet and had the same notes of musk that Mallory's has. "You two have imprinted on each other?" Troy asked, even though he knew it was already so. Their smells too much alike now for them not to have created that bond. It was a bond that Troy had been hoping to create with Mallory himself, but it had not happened during their time together. Imprinting for natural-borns and changelings often took a lot of time, and even then, it wasn't always guaranteed to happen. His parents had been together for many years, and an imprint had never formed between them. It was something sacred and cherished among the couples that were lucky enough to have it. "We have," Andres said with confidence. Troy could feel his fangs aching, and the red haze flickered in his vision. Andreas had had Mallory for such a short time, yet it was obvious by the way they both smelled that their bond was strong. "Does she know you are both bonded? Maybe that's why she decided to run away from you, because the idea of being tied down to a relic for the rest of her young life was too much to handle," Troy retorted. "No, she doesn't know yet, and you're one to talk about making her run. You know, she has nightmares every night she wakes up, screaming for you to stop hurting and torturing her." Andres' words struck a chord in Troy. He wasn't an evil man. He had his flaws, but abuse and torture were not part of them. He hated that he might be responsible for making her life miserable. All he had wanted was a companion that he could easily control. To achieve that, he was going to have to completely break her. Mallory had such a wild and lively spirit. The glow on her face the first time Troy had seen her in that diner had been so full of life and character. He had been hell-bent on destroying that in her. He knew he was broken inside, but that didn't give him a reason to break others. Troy looked away from Andreas and contemplated his next move. He could fight to keep her, and things would get very bloody very fast. Then, if he did win and was able to make it back home with Mallory, he'd have to live with the fact that he had stolen her away from her imprinted mate. He had said he didn't want that for himself, but it was a lie. To have someone who was perfectly crafted to coincide with everything you were in life, someone who would fill the void in your soul that everyone is born to have, was something he craved. Who wouldn't want that? Even someone as cold and calculating as Troy could see the appeal. He might be a monster, but he wasn't evil. Or at least that's what he kept telling himself. Perhaps by letting Mallory go, he would somehow be able to redeem himself, even if only partly. "I want you to stop all shipments into the state, Gaudino," Troy suddenly stated, causing Andreas to raise a single black eyebrow before he nodded. "That can be arranged." "I'll know if you don't, and I'll come back with others and I'll take her away from you," Troy told him, wanting to make sure he got the point across. "Deal." Troy nodded, then reached into his front pocket to take out the keys to Mallory's cuffs. Taking a step towards Andreas, he held out the keys for him. Andreas grabbed them and then turned to the car she was in without even asking. He must have felt her pull on his energy. Troy had noticed that as soon as Gaudino had gotten out of the car, Mallory had stopped pulling at his aura completely. Her body must have recognized him as hers, even if her conscious mind hadn't realized it yet. He waited for Andreas to retrieve Mallory, and there was a loss in his heart. He hadn't loved her, but had hoped to someday. "Someone should really give me props for being such a good person," Troy thought as he watched Andreas carry Mallory to his red sports car and drive away. He felt empty and cold inside. It was the right thing to do, letting her go. In reality, he knew he should never have treated her the way he had. It had been impulsive and sadistic. He had always known that he was messed up, but to abuse an innocent woman like that was extreme, even for him. He loved to torture individuals that had wronged him, but never someone whose only crime was being born a little too desirable.